Hey everyone, this is Tony Holbein from Growblocks. You are listening to the Revenue Formula with Mikkel and Tony. In today's episode, we discuss how to qualify a future employer so you take the right next step. Enjoy.
So we had an entire episode planned out for a wonderful listener who sent us a question.
We'll get to it.
We'll get to it, but we decided, which happens very rarely, I might add, we decided to go completely off script now. Completely.
And it's
record
usually
something.
because what? You have like a rogue CEO that just comes in and is like, want to talk about this year now.
Yeah. I know you planned a project A, B, and C, but actually, have you heard about SET? I really like it.
I just saw it on LinkedIn.
Yeah. And it's totally going to work. It's like week after, it's like forgotten.
Can you make the logo a little bit bigger?
Yeah, exactly. That's it. So we actually decided to talk a bit about the folks looking for a job, looking for the new gig.
Yes.
How should they navigate this environment? How should they basically qualify their future employer? That's really what it is, right? And you and I have done that ourselves a couple of times before. You haven't qualified your employer? Of
course.
Of course you have. Some have succeeded in qualifying them, others have not, which is why I'm here. So we're going to talk a bit about that because it is pretty important. The step you make in terms of job is not just going to influence your career, also you personally.
Yeah.
So pretty impactful for you as a listener. So that's what we want to get into today.
Is this going to be the intro or going to have another intro? No,
I don't
right?
have another. No.
So
This
actually,
was the
kind of
rogue
fun
CEO.
fact, we're gonna leave the studio set up like it is now because actually my two kids are gonna come over in like an hour or two.
And record the next episode.
Basically something with some heft behind it.
I'm looking forward to the mix of like
with real
German,
depth,
English,
you know?
and intelligent because we're not getting much out of
No. Okay, let's.
Why are we looking
now
at the paper? Why am I looking at the paper now? Because this is no longer valid.
I have some notes here, so I'm not sure what you're talking about.
This is encrypted. No one can read Tony's writing.
So let's get into the problem itself.
Yeah.
So again, right, we want to talk to some of the folks that are listening that are maybe on the Pavilion started this. I'm not sure if they popularized. I heard it from Pavilion first, so whatever. They popularizing this term called sitting on the bench. Which basically is about like, you're in between jobs. You're not on the playing field, I guess. That's the American, metaphor right now. If I got it right, I'm not sure. But basically kind of you're sitting on the bench, right, of which there are many, many people right now. And usually also people, especially higher seniorities.
Yeah.
Right? And why is that? Well, it's a little bit harder to find your next gig if you're a C-level or VP versus an AE.
Yeah.
Like it's a little bit harder. Because there are so many AE jobs and there are just so few other jobs.
Yeah, and they don't get listed, by the way.
The tip of the pyramid is a bit tighter.
Yeah.
So that's why a lot of senior folks are sitting on the bench right now. And I think I think the employment market is starting to wake up again, to thaw. Kind of there's stuff moving again. But everyone that, could jump into a job now I think they are a bit more careful now.
Yeah.
I think they got burned many times, and I'm specifically talking CRO, CMO folks.
Mm-hmm.
We'll talk a little bit about like a special, RevOps thing here as well. But those two personas, VP of sales is in there, obviously. They got burned, and many times probably were fired or laid off, not because of reasons of, them not succeeding with something.
Yeah.
Right. But obviously, as an organization, does that being portrayed like that and so forth, and you don't really have hard proof against and so forth. So kind of like a shitty experience. Let's just say a shitty experience. You work your heart out for this organization. You kind of do everything you can all day long. You work long hours. You see the business is hurting. You kind of put in the extra work, and then there comes like, you didn't hit your target. You're gone by.
Yeah.
Right. So that sucks. So and in that case, I think they got burned basically. But at the same time, yes, I think for some, money is obviously a topic, right? You can't just not work, especially if you have in the US, I don't know, $300, $400, $500, like K, large ones, salary. Kind of, you can't just like not have that for too long, right? While they're getting more careful, I think they're also just really afraid of misstepping.
Yeah.
Making the wrong move next.
Yeah.
Right? Because it's it's one thing to get burned and, when this crazy period and, hey, every little shitty startup is going to make it and let's go. Versus, well, now that I kind of come from that experience, I want to make sure my next steps are right. And also think about it like a life thing, right? Kind of when you're in your late 30s, 40s, and 50s, you don't want to be jumping in and out of roles every 6 or 7 or 12 months or something like this, right? You want to find something that you can sink your teeth in. And I think figuring that out before you join, pretty important.
Yeah.
Right? So I think what we want to talk about today is a little bit, how can you do an audit of your prospective employer?
Yeah, that's it. And actually, one of the things, by the way, just on this whole job switching thing that I saw and found pretty interesting. So it's become pretty common to switch jobs earlier. If you look at the boomers, that generation,
of course,
they would stick around for way longer. Yeah, they would stick around way longer, right? They would get a medal for staying 25 years or stuff like that. It's the generation I'm from now and you are from is not the same. They switch more frequently. And actually, there was a stat showing that the growth of salary of those who switch jobs more frequently is higher than those who don't. So there is also that upside. But don't be fooled. You shouldn't just switch job because of the paycheck. And we're going to get into some of the things at least you should ask to kind of diagnose, hey, is this even a place I should consider going to?
So I think the first thing you need to make up your mind about is, let's just say, any role. So especially we're going to talk about the sales leader, CRO, RevOps leader or RevOps person, kind of marketing leader, CMO, kind of those profiles. The first thing you need to think about is like, what overall risk profile do you want to have? And, for that, if you're like in the startup world, the risk profile correlates extremely nicely with the different funding rounds that someone completed.
Yeah.
Think about it like that, right? If someone is in seed stage, massive risk, 80, 90% likelihood this thing is going to go, belly up, not going to work out for, your fault or not. Doesn't actually matter. Kind of those are external odds. Sure, you can influence them and so forth, but you just need to be aware of that.
Yeah.
Right? Then A, those chances now kind of get better and better, B and so forth, until it is boring, C and D, basically like corporate, it feels like, right? You just need to be aware that, that risk level that's just inherent with those choices. And I'm not saying you shouldn't be joining a seed company, by the way, but I'm saying you need to figure out yourself if that's okay with you.
Yeah.
Right?
And actually, so since we're a seed company, the reflection I had is, say the company goes belly up and I need to go interview with someone else. What will that look like to the prospective employer? And I actually just realized, well, it all comes down to the work I perform. What do I have to show? Because that might not necessarily correlate with, the work I did leading to the company failing. That there's all kinds of things with product market fit, et cetera, right?
No, exactly. But so I think from this perspective, it's more about if you join a company that's in seed, you might only be there for 12 months and then you need to look for the next thing. Think about, I don't think it's going to be your fault or anything, but think about like, hey, that has a large chance of reducing the average tenure that you maybe hoped you would get there. And then, there's also a flip side, which many people see as an extreme. That's why all of those crazy people join those early stage firms. Is like, oh, I can impact stuff. And you can, and that's kind of the really cool thing. But and again, right, when you join a thing like this, just be aware. Yes, you will be not just like a cog in the system. You will be pretty important, but also, for reasons not of your own, but obviously you have an impact. Reasons not of your own, this thing could not work out. Right? And I think that's fine. So let's just say we kind of get over this hump. The next thing that you probably want to ask for as a commercial leader, and I think that would go for CMO and CRO, a couple of stats I would be testing. I would be asking for average quota completion. Yeah. How many of the reps are hitting target? And, that doesn't tell you much about the organization, but it tells you a little bit in terms of like the health, the mindset, what kind of shop they're running. If you're CRO, those would be things you can tweak obviously afterwards, but it gives you a little bit like, what's the playbook that's present there? Is it still the kind of 5 years ago playbook where you just kind of throw in more reps? Or is it a little bit more understood and balanced? Right? What would be like a stat you would be asking for from the marketing side?
I would just ask them to the ability to hit the plan overall, honestly. And really understanding like, hey, if they've been unable to meet their plan, when was the last time they did it? Because it kind of, for me, tells me, are they living in this dream world of, yeah, we do need to follow the unicorn path. So that's what we put in the plan, but there's no way the organization is geared to meet those objectives.
I think this is almost kind of a different chapter, and maybe let's jump into this and then maybe get back to some of the metrics. But this whole, what has been the plan, what is the plan, and it's not about trying to, like, from 5 feet away diagnose if this thing is going to work out. I think for me, it's way more listening to the thinking and the awareness of the other side.
Yeah,
I think it's totally fine if you're early stage not to hit your plan. I think it's fine. I think the bigger issue is like, well, what's your reasoning why it didn't work out? And what do you want to do going forward?
Yeah.
Red flag for me would be, well, we missed target because the sales reps are shit.
Yeah.
Right?
They're lazy.
Honestly, that would be like a typical, like, okay, yes, there's a chance that that's true.
Yeah.
By the way, you're also responsible for that because you probably hired and onboarded those folks. But there's a chance that it's true. But then there's a very, very large chance that it's nothing to do with that.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And this might be a product problem or it might be a go-to-market problem. You don't actually know at that point, right? But still, you want to have that conversation. And this is more like the introspective, retrospective, trying to figure out why you missed. I think the other thing you should be asking is like, well, where is this going? Especially as a CEO or CMO, what's the one up? Where do you want me to kind of get this thing? Where do you want me to help to kind of get this thing? And then have an honest conversation with them around what's their thinking. I haven't encountered a situation where someone says like, I don't know, that's what I hired you for.
Yeah.
I think that's,
that's also bullshit.
I think that's a little bit bullshit. But what you want to hear is like, well, we're thinking about an outbound motion.
Yeah.
We're thinking about this region. We're thinking about, hey, we want to build up this sales team like this. And not all of these things need to make sense. Not all of the folks out there understand how this revenue engine works, and that's truly why you are hired. So some of that stuff will be like, what does that have to do with the growth plan? I don't get it. But you want to have them reason through this. And to your point, what you don't want to have them say is because the board said we need to triple.
Yeah.
Right? That can be the motivation. I think that can be the conversation in the boardroom, but it cannot be how someone is reasoning through how they want to achieve that, right?
No.
That cannot be. That would be a red flag for me.
I think an interesting thing you mentioned here is like, what's the one up? Really, right? And I think there is something around almost the employer-employee fit that you need to establish as well in the process. You as an individual, especially, I think this is for marketing especially, you will bring certain competencies because marketing has different disciplines. Some are going to be really strong on the brand side. Some are going to be really strong in a competitive environment, like market-wise. Some are going to be really strong on demand gen or whatever it is, right? And I think you need to figure out what is it actually that the business strategically needs to achieve? And do you have the competencies and skill to do that? I think the other classic employee-employer fit thing you see is what stage do you excel at? Is it the seed to Series A? Is it Series A to B, C, D? Or like where?
I think on this one, it's super abstract to use those letters. I think the way I would be thinking about this, are you the 0 to 1 guy or girl? Or are you the playbook guy or girl?
Yeah.
Right? And that might help you with below 1 million, below 10 million and so forth. There's like a little bit of this that helps you. But really think about it. Are you the figuring it out kind of personality? Or I'm just going to tweak all the really important little notches to kind of make this thing go crazy.
Yeah.
Right? And you might have different skill sets that kind of then resonate differently. Right? Yes, absolutely. That's a good one. I think a very interesting one in your due diligence, and look at this like an investor would do due diligence, by the way. An investor, one of the first things they would ask is like, what's your gross retention rate? What's your net retention rate? Just tell me. Like, what is it? Why is this helpful? Well, this is telling you if that company truly is product market fit.
Yeah.
That's what this is actually doing. And it's super important to kind of keep in mind. Let's just say you are entering an organization is, really, doing the go-to-market stuff for 1 or 2 years, super early on. Chances are their gross and net retention rate are going to be super inflated. They didn't have enough cycles yet where people, had the opportunity to churn, right? They don't know what their lifetime value is yet, right? And, take that with a grain of salt. It's like number one. Number two, you also need to differentiate, and we talked about this a lot. Different segments churn differently.
Yeah.
So when I joined, an SMB company, so they were selling to SMBs, and they told me that they had an 85% gross retention and 105 net retention. That was insane. That was extremely great. Yeah. I came from a mid-market organization that was hovering on 75 to 85, right? So that was really, really strong. But if this is like an enterprise team you're joining with like 100K tickets, that's not good, right? So you need to put it into perspective, both how long have they been operating and, to which segments they're selling, right?
Yeah.
There's probably some kind of a matrix somewhere, but kind of think about this a little bit, whether or not that, sounds good or not. And for all of these things, all of the stuff that you're collecting here, some of that might feel off, or you don't fully kind of comprehend how all of these things piece together. Reach out to a friend, maybe an investor friend or something like this, and have them kind of help you kind of get you an idea. So I can just kind of really recommend that.
I think the other reflection I've had when I look at especially the tenure of some of the senior roles, we just discussed they're getting shorter, right? And I think it's really important for you to understand, when do they expect an impact by? Because quite often that's going to be unrealistic, and at least it gives you a chance to tackle that up front. So let's say you need to build up outbound. That's going to take you 12 months until you have, okay, now it works, now we can scale it, right? But if the expectation is, okay, 3 months for onboarding and you being ramped up, then quarter after outbound is going, okay, cool, good. Then you're kind of screwed, right?
Absolutely. So sorry.
So I think that is actually critical to understand, when is it the desired impact they see that taking place.
Yeah. And I think there you also have an opportunity to show your expertise.
Yeah.
To say, hey, and this is not, me being good or bad at that stuff, but generally speaking, you're looking at this timeline for something like this working out. If you, for financial reasons, need an impact earlier, we might need to look at different initiatives to achieve that, right? And then you could start digging in a little bit into, a short-term initiative could be, are there ways where and you will be focusing on the sales team here basically, are there ways where the sales team is giving too much discount? Can we increase ACV a little bit? Can we, improve those conversion rates a little bit? While also not being blinded to the realization that, if I have to double the team, because that's realistically also what we want to do, keeping conversion rates and ACVs flat, that would even be an achievement.
Yeah.
Right? Kind of really creating, it's not trying to short sell yourself, but this is also a way to educate and show your expertise and kind of level these things out a little bit. And I had a conversation with someone the other day, and he's considering maybe a seed early Series A team. And this is really going from founder-led to something that he would then be doing. And it's kind of a tricky spot, right? Because on the one hand side, it goes from amateur salesperson, I would consider myself an amateur salesperson, to a professional, right? That should have a positive impact. But it's losing the co-founder C-level title. Yeah. It's losing all the knowledge that founders build up, not only over the time in the company, but also before, that is super relevant for the problem. So are you going to actually increase conversion rates, or are you going to try and protect conversion rates?
I mean, it's also cheating, because this founder CEO also have another card to play and say, well, are you telling me you're going to sign if I build that feature?
Yeah.
Okay, you can sign now. I'll get the team. And it's like,
you're absolutely right? So kind of, this kind of conversation, I think, can be extremely, extremely good.
Yeah.
To, at worst case, they think you're an idiot because of these things, and then this wasn't a match anyway.
Yeah.
Great. Yeah. Bye. Best, middle case, this doesn't work out, but at least you have educated that founder, and maybe there's a team going to be more successful.
Yeah.
Thank you. Or like, hey, you join with a set, having set the right expectation. Right?
Yeah.
I think there's lots of upsides to this approach.
I think the other interesting thing to know in terms of whether it's a smart move to take a job is also, in many cases, as a leader, you're going to replace someone.
Yeah.
And that person you're replacing has either chosen to leave for another opportunity, or has been pushed out. Right. And I think
pushed below, right?
Maybe or pushed below, could also be, right? But I think what's super important to understand, if that person has chosen to leave him or herself, it can be a natural thing, by the way. It doesn't have to have anything to do with the company. But they now want to understand things like, well, how long did he or she stay with the company? If it's like a long tenure, I was like, okay, probably then there's a lot of stability, a lot of continuity, a bit more calmness around the team versus if, yeah, this is the second leader in 2 years you're coming in to replace, like very different environment you're going to get into.
So on the replacement topic, and this is, I picked this up from, I think, Sam Jacobs, Pavilion. He was talking about this like, hey, just be aware. Whether or not you're placing the VP of sales or not, doesn't actually matter. If you're working in an organization that was founder-led before, like founder-led sales, which is, almost all organizations, honestly, just be aware that, what will always go through this person's mind is like, I could do this job as well. I don't need to pay $500,000 for this. I could just literally jump in and do this myself tomorrow. Right. So, and I think and this is especially for VP sales, for VP marketing is a little bit different, but for the VP sales profiles, just be aware there's like a permanent, constant sitting at the ready on the bench next to you, person that has more power than you have, that feels for all the wrong reasons that he or she could step in immediately.
Yeah.
Right. Just be aware of that, and that's fine. Just manage it. I think the importance is to be aware that that's actually kind of also what goes through some people's minds, especially when funds are running low and they, in the middle of the night sort the spreadsheet. By the way, you don't need to sort any spreadsheet. You know this as a CEO. Who's my most expensive ticket? And it's like, okay, so if I only lost this one person, that would give me basically 2 months more runway, and I just need to kind of step in and do those sales calls again. We can do this, right?
Speaking of runway, I think that's also kind of almost a, tender subject? It's kind of sensitive subject, right? But you do want to have an idea of what the runway is for that business, especially at this point in time.
So, following trick, that will tell you always is more than 12 months.
Yeah.
Always. But what you can actually do, and this is roughly correct, you basically take the head count that is kind of present in the business, time it by $100,000 per year, roughly fully loaded with all the other stuff. That's kind of what you're looking at. And, then apply that number, how often does it fit into the last funding round? Then you have your runway. It's super straightforward. There's, all kinds of other, take a little, give a little for where they are in revenue and so forth. Yes, totally get that. But especially in the early days when run rate is an actual problem, like Series A, basically, up until once you're hitting B, run rate is not being discussed anymore. It's kind of, it's there, money's there. You're at 20, 30 million. You can go to literally a venture capital bank and get money. You're not going to run out of cash that easily, but everything pre-B, like seed and A, that's the problem there. And that revenues aren't that high anyway, right? So you can apply that logic kind of to roughly figure this out. This is how I would, by the way, do it if I was you. Yeah. But basically kind of this is a way to kind of get around this, like how much money is left in the bank. You can kind of estimate this to a degree, right? I would also say that, things like growth rate, gross retention rate, net retention rate, and, talking about this, CAC payback and so forth, kind of those things, I think you should be asking about to also show that you understand these concepts. Yeah. But also, those are things you can take to a VC friend and say like, hey, those are the stats roughly. Do you think they will get funding next time? Kind of, is this a fundable case actually? That gives you also a little bit of an idea, especially if joining seed or A, if they're, how likely are they to make the next step, right? And chances are that the numbers won't look that great because otherwise they would be out there getting funding right now, right? Kind of, that's usually how it is. Kind of, it goes in like valleys and peaks. You go out when your stats are great, and then for a long time your stats are shit, and then your stats are great again, right? Kind of, otherwise it doesn't work, right? Yeah. So keep this in mind that, again, take it with a grain of salt and not say, okay, VC friend said he wouldn't invest right now. Doesn't mean they can't get investment later on. Next one, and this might be controversial, especially as a C-level or as a senior person, negotiate your exit package.
Yeah.
Super weird.
So not saying I'm going to leave, but if I join and then leave.
No, it's a little bit like, honey, I really think we should have a prenup. That's kind of the kind of conversation, and it's difficult, and it's not that, it's sensitive as well. But we all know if you're a C or VP, you're not going to find a job in the next 2 weeks. Like in the US, you have like a notice period of 2 weeks, right? Maybe you have a month or whatever.
Yeah.
In Denmark, you have 3 months. Great. In Germany,
Unless you're
I
on
don't
a
know.
contract.
Yeah.
Zero.
I'm just saying, right? So it's very clear that you will not find the next job for the, notice period that is put in place by the government.
Yeah.
It's not going to happen.
No.
Right? You will need more time because again, you're sitting on the bench, you got burned, you're careful and so forth. And there are not so many opportunities, right? So you need to have kind of a conversation already there and then to kind of discuss how the negative scenario works out.
Yeah.
and I would to try and approach it as matter of fact as possible.
Yeah.
It's like, hey, all of us know this is going to go fantastic. Don't get me wrong. But I have a family, I have a mortgage, I have an expensive car. I have some savings, but those are my savings. My brain fridge is really big. Yeah. We need to have a conversation, if this doesn't go well, for my reasons or not my reasons, by the way, how we can, unravel this here without me completely getting screwed over here.
Yeah.
Right. And when it happens, there's no, good blood left. It's all bad blood at that point in time. And yes, people, amicably and blah, blah, blah. But at those points, especially when the company's under distress, you're not going to be super like, oh, you know what? Let's be generous.
No.
Let's give another 3 to 6 months.
Yeah.
The reason why I'm firing is cash, but let's give you more cash.
Yeah.
It's not going to work out like this.
No.
So you want to have these things pre-negotiated. And I would probably leave it at, a time frame that you get money and whether or not you get the full OTE or not, or kind of OTE, how do you calculate that based on your previous achievements and so forth. Those would be the things I would be trying to navigate in order to land this in a reasonable way. And in Europe, your starting point would be, governmental notice period at that point plus. In the US, I think you need to have, the thing is, it's employment at will. You might have, 2 weeks or something. And I don't know. It's like you at least want to have 3 months.
Yeah.
3 months paid. Right?
There's also the double trigger event being talked about. So if you have warrants or ESUs, there's like an accelerator that kicks in upon an event like that. You can also negotiate into place. But I think it's a good point. You want to have it in place. And I think this is also where they will show kind of who they are to a degree. Yeah. Right? Are they receptive to having this conversation? I think this will show you, those uncomfortable conversations up front will show you a lot.
Yeah.
You don't want to complicate the process, obviously, with your future employer.
I think it's difficult because it is complicating the process.
Yeah.
Right? And I think it's a little bit like when you sell a deal to someone, right? You can't squeezing these things if you're like, they're on the edge and maybe not. I would argue if they're like on the maybe not, kind of maybe then this is probably also not a good start, place for you to begin with, right? Kind of because then, especially in those scenarios, negotiating an exit package is even more important, if you will. Right?
Yeah.
So I think it's delicate, but I also think if you're a senior, if you already don't want to mess this up, if you can create a reasonable story that says like, hey, I'm sorry, I'm just not 24 anymore.
Yeah.
I cannot do it like this. I think if you're running that narrative, I think people will kind of see it, especially if you're sitting in front of an adult as well, right?
Yeah.
And then the last one is compensation in terms of warrants. So the thing, or warrants, or ESOP, or shares, or RSUs, or whatever it might be, you kind of need to understand what these numbers are about. And I'm not going to go into all the details of this, but if they're only telling you get 1,000 warrants at a strike price of $5, you know nothing.
Yeah.
You have no fucking clue what this means.
No.
This could be, a glass of coffee, or it could be like a new house. You don't know where it's in between. So what you need to understand is like, okay, thank you very much. 1,000 warrants out of how many in total shares, right? You want to understand that. They either give you this other number or they tell you the percentage, right? The percentage point. And then the strike price, at what valuation is that actually putting me, right? Is the strike price the shares that you paid for your totally inflated Series A? Or is this a discount on that? Or is it actually even further down? Or where are we here? Why is this important? Well, the strike price basically kind of determines the share price at when you actually start making money. So if the overall share price at a sale doesn't go above $5, you don't make any money.
They're underwater.
So you only make money, between the difference of the $5 to what it's eventually being sold for, right? That you need to understand that. And if you're stepping into an organization where the $5 puts you at a 15 million valuation at $2 million in revenue,
you're underwater.
You need to understand that you will have to do a lot of catching up.
Yeah.
And a lot of blood, sweat, and tears will go into even reaching the 50 million. And then on top of that, can you then get this from 50 million to 150 million where you start making bank, or can you not, right? And you just need to be aware. And sometimes you can't negotiate, but usually at C-level, you can negotiate and kind of try and get this number a little bit down to maybe put you at a 25 million or something. I entered one organization. I think I had a 40% discount on the last round for one part. And then I had a 0% discount for another part of my compensation, right? You can go in all kinds of different directions here. And you just need to understand that it's so easy to screw over people with this.
Yeah.
And you just need to kind of be aware how those things work and then, make this part of the negotiation.
Maybe that's like a full-on rev letter at some point. It's such a massive subject, honestly.
Yeah.
But it's so important. It's such a key part of compensation, or at least the promise, to be honest, of a startup that you can get a stake, and that can be a life-changing event. But I think a lot of it is just snake oil. So.
Besides in Growblocks, right, Mikkel?
Of course. That's why we're 2 years recording this show.
That's right.
That's why. So,
thanks, Mikkel.
Thank you, Tony.
Thanks, everyone, for listening. Hit like, follow,
subscribe,
share,
download,
and just the love button.
Yeah.
If there's one. If you have some feedback, send it to podcast@growblocks.com. Some inspiration for new episodes. Or if you think that Mikkel's shirt, he should change his shirt maybe once in a while, you can totally do that. Have a good one, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.